The dog will not move. Snow comes sideways across the hillside cemetery, thin and stinging, and the German shepherd circles the same headstone for the fourth time, nose down, tail low, a sound building in his chest that is not quite a growl and not quite a cry. He has ignored every other grave on the rise. He passed the fresh ones and the old ones and the broken ones without a glance. This single weathered stone holds him, the way a scent holds him, the way a wound holds a man, and he will not be called off it. Cole Brennan stands 10 feet back with the leash slack in his glove, watching a dog who has never once disobeyed him refuse to come. He says the dog's name again. Duke. The shepherd's ears flick back, acknowledging him, then drop forward to the stone. That single gesture stops Cole where he stands because in 6 years that animal has not weighed a command against a thing on the ground and chosen the ground. Not once. Me goes, and if a quiet story about loyalty and the long way home is something you would sit with, stay through to the end of this one, it earns its ending slowly. Cole had come up here for another grave entirely. His mother had been buried on the far north slope 11 years back, and he had missed the burial. And he had told himself for a decade that he would drive out to the little town of Harlan's Bend and stand over her once before he was too old to feel anything about it. The drive had taken 2 days. He had brought the dog because he brought the dog everywhere now, because a Marine who comes home to nobody learns to need the one creature that stayed. He had parked a truck at the iron gate, let Duke out to stretch, and started up the gravel path toward the north slope. He never got there. The dog had peeled off the path 40 yards in, drawn sideways across the rows, as if a hand had reached out of the ground and taken hold of his collar, and he had brought up at this stone and started his circling, and an hour of Cole's life had bled away in the cold while he tried to understand it. He crossed the last 10 feet. He had not wanted to read the name. He understood in the way the body understands a thing before the mind agrees to it, that whatever was written on that stone was going to cost him something, and he had spent a long time arranging his life so that nothing could cost him anything again. The dog looked up at him as he came, then back to the granite, pressing his shoulder against it, and Cole crouched and brushed the snow from the face of the stone with the flat of his glove. Daniel Reyes. Below the name, 2 dates, and the second of them was a day Cole would have known anywhere, because it was the day he had stopped being whole. He sat back on his heels. The cold went out of his hands. He had carried that name across 11 years and 3 deployments and 4 cities, and he had never once imagined it carved into a stone in a town he had only chosen because his mother happened to die near it. Daniel Reyes had been 19 the last time Cole saw him. They had served together in a place Cole did not say the name of anymore, and Daniel had gone down in front of him in a street that smelled of diesel and dust, and Cole had carried him out, and Daniel had not made it to the helicopter. That was the story Cole had told himself for 11 years, that Daniel had died over there, that there was no grave, because there had not been enough left to bring home, only a flag and a folded letter sent to a mother Cole had never met and never written to. Because what does a man say? The dates on the stone said Daniel Reyes had died 3 years ago, not 11-3. Duke had gone still. The dog sat down in the snow beside the stone and leaned his weight against Cole's leg, and the 2 of them stayed there while the snow came down over Harlan's Bend, while a truth Cole could not yet hold began to take its shape in the white air, and Cole said the only thing he could find to say, which was the boy's name, out loud, into a wind that took it and gave nothing back. He did not remember walking down. He found himself at the iron gate with the dog beside him and the truck, cold and his hands still not working right, and a woman was standing at the gate with a thermos and a question on her face. She was perhaps 60, small and square-built, in a quilted coat the color of a robin's egg gone pale, her gray hair pinned back hard against the wind, and she had the steady, weathered look of a person who had buried more than she had been allowed to keep. She introduced herself as the cemetery's caretaker. Her name was Verna Pruitt. She had watched the dog from the maintenance shed, she said, and she had never in 30 years seen an animal do what that one was doing. Cole asked her if she knew the Reyes grave. Verna's face changed. It did not soften, and it did not close. It settled the way a face settles when a person decides to tell the truth instead of the easy thing. And she poured coffee from the thermos into the cup of the lid and put it in his hands before she answered, because she could see his hands. She had known Daniel, she said, not well. He had come to Harlan's Bend about 4 years ago. Quiet, alone, renting the old Setterfield place out past the grain elevator, doing odd work where he could find it. He had not talked about the service. She had not asked. He kept to himself, and he was kind to her in small ways, carried her salt bags in the winter, fixed the latch on the shed door without being asked. And then one fall he was gone, and the next she heard of him, a stone went up on the hillside, paid for by the county, because there had been no family anyone could find. Cole asked how he died. Verna looked at the dog a long moment before she looked at Cole. She said the word the way you set down something heavy. Alone, she said. He died alone in that rented house, and nobody knew for the better part of a week. And then she said the thing that turned the whole afternoon, the thing Cole would carry out of that cemetery heavier than the name itself. She said the county had it down as natural causes. She said most folks did not believe it. "Drink some of that," she told him, nodding at the coffee. "You have the look of a man who needs to sit down and has nowhere to sit." Cole drank the coffee. The dog watched him drink it. And somewhere in the cold machinery of him, the part that had been switched off for 11 years began, against his will, to turn over. He told himself he would stay one night. There was a motel on the county road, 8 rooms, a flickering sign that buzzed when the second letter tried to light, a clerk behind a sliding glass window who took cash and asked nothing and went back to a small television playing a weather report for a county 2 over. The room smelled of old cigarettes and pine cleaner laid over the top of them. A radiator ticked in the corner without giving much heat. Cole sat on the edge of the bed for a long while with his boots still on, and the folder of his own memory open in front of him, and the dog watched him from the doorway until Cole patted the second mattress, and only then did Duke come up and turn 3 slow circles and lie down facing the door, the way he always lay, the watch never fully set down. Cole let the dog up on the second bed and lay awake listening to the wind work at the window. And he ran the arithmetic again and again, and it would not come out. Daniel had died over there. He had carried the body himself. He had felt the weight go slack in his arms. The slack weight, he remembered, though, was not death. He understood that now, lying in the dark with the truth pressing on his chest. The boy had been alive when the helicopter took him. Cole had assumed the rest. He had built 11 years of grief on an assumption, and the boy had walked out of that war and come to a small, cold town and lived 4 more years, and died in a rented house alone 3 winters ago while Cole was in another city, telling people the kid was gone. The pressure in his chest tightened unexpectedly. He had not earned the grief. That was the thing that would not let him sleep. He had grieved a living man and missed the chance to be his friend. In the morning he drove out to the Setterfield place, He did not have a plan. He had an address Verna had drawn on a napkin and a dog who would not stop watching him as if he might disappear. The house sat at the end of a rutted lane, low and gray, the porch sagging, the windows papered over from inside. A realtor's sign leaned in the yard, faded, the phone number sun-bleached to nothing. Duke went out of the truck before Cole had the door fully open and went straight to the porch and sat and would not come down, and Cole had learned by now to read that as an instruction. A man was watching from the road. A dark crew cab truck, idling, a man behind the wheel in a clean canvas jacket, sunglasses though the morning was flat and gray. When Cole looked at him, the truck did not pull away in a hurry, which is what an innocent man does. It pulled away slowly, deliberately, the way a man pulls away when he wants you to know he was never worried about being seen. Cole memorized the plate without deciding to. Years of disaster zones had trained him to log the thing that did not fit, but years of something else had done their own work, and the something else woke up now and started paying attention. He went back to the cemetery that afternoon. Verna was there, raking the last leaves out of the frozen flower beds along the front wall, and she set the rake against the wall when she saw him coming and waited. He asked her who would want it, written down as natural causes. He asked it plainly, the way he had learned to ask the only questions worth the breath. Verna did not pretend. She did not understand him. There was a company, she said. Came through about 2 years before Daniel died, buying up the old places out past the elevator, the rented ones, the ones with no families left, to fuss metal-line property partners, the signs said. They paid the county for the tax liens, and then they owned the back taxes, and then somehow they owned the houses, and the old folks who had been renting them month to month for 20 years got letters, and then they got men in clean jackets at the door, and then they got gone. Verna had watched it happen up and down that road. Daniel had been renting the Setterfield place. Daniel had not gone quietly. That was the part she knew. The rest she only suspected, and she was too old. She said to be careless with a suspicion you. Though, she said, looking at the dog, then at Cole, you are not too old, and that animal did not circle that stone for nothing. Cole asked her what she meant. Verna picked the rake back up. Animals know who is owed something, she said. My grandmother believed that, and I have lived long enough to stop arguing with her. That dog brought you to that grave. I would not waste it. That hit him harder than he expected. He stayed a second night, then a third. He told the motel clerk he would take the room by the week, and the clerk shrugged, and the dog claimed the second bed for good. Cole did not call it a decision. He called it being thorough. He drove the county roads and read the leaning signs, and where the signs said Meadowline he stopped and looked, and what he saw was a pattern. 11 houses along that stretch, the cheap rented kind, and 9 of them stood empty now. Papered windows, dead yards, realtor signs gone gray. The 2 still occupied had old people in them. He met one of them on the 4th day, an old man named Asa Whitlock, 81, lean as a fence post, who came to his door with a shotgun broken open over his forearm and lowered it when he saw the dog. Because a man who travels with a dog like that, he said, is generally not the kind of man they send. Cole asked who they were. Asa told him to come in out of the cold and tell the dog he could come too, and he made coffee that could strip paint, and he talked for an hour while Duke lay across the threshold with his eyes open. Asa had rented his house 34 years. He had a letter on his kitchen table, the 3rd one, and this one had a date on it, 60 days. After that, the letter said the property would be, quote, returned to productive use, And Asa said he had looked up what that meant, and what it meant was a parking lot for the grain co-op expansion, and what stood between Meadowline and a very profitable strip of land was 11 stubborn old leases and the people too poor and too tired to fight them. Daniel Reyes had not been old. Daniel Reyes had been 33 and strong and angry, and Daniel Reyes had started knocking on doors up and down that road, telling people not to sign anything, telling them the leases protected them, telling them to wait. Asa said the boy had a folder of papers he had been gathering, copies of the old leases, the county tax records, the names. Asa said the boy had told him 3 weeks before he died that he was close to something that would stop them cold. And then the boy was dead. Natural causes, in a locked house, and the folder was never found, and the letters started coming again. Cole asked where the folder might be. Asa looked at him a long time. Then he looked at the dog. The boy loved that house, Asa said. Hated to leave it, even to buy groceries. If he hid something, he hid it where he could keep his eye on it. And then Asa said the thing that made Cole set his cup down. The dog, Asa said. You know the boy had a dog, big shepherd like yours, went everywhere with him. After the boy died, the dog was gone too. County never found it. Some folks figured it ran off. Some figured worse. Duke lifted his head off the floor. Cole drove back to the Setterfield place that night with a flashlight and the dog, and no permission he could have shown a judge. He told himself he was only looking. The papered windows let no light out and none in, and the back door gave under his shoulder with the soft complaint of a lock that had been forced before. Inside, the house was a held breath. Furniture under sheets, dust deep and even, the smell of a place where the air had stopped moving. Duke went through it ahead of him, room by room, methodical, and Cole followed the dog, because by now he understood that the dog was reading something he could not. In the back bedroom, Duke stopped at the closet and put his nose to the floor, along the baseboard, and would not move. Cole knelt. The floorboards were old and wide, and one of them sat a hair proud of its neighbors. He worked the blade of his knife into the seam and lifted, and the board came up clean, cut short, and fitted back, the work of a careful man, and in the cavity beneath it sat a folder wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, dry, untouched, exactly where a man would hide a thing he meant to keep his eye on. Cole drew it out with hands that had gone steady, now steady the way they got when the work in front of him was the only thing in the world. He did not open it in that house. Something told him not to. He put it inside his jacket and went out the way he came, and the dog went with him close at the heel, and out on the road, 200 yards off with its lights dark, the dark crew cab truck sat idling. Cole did not run. He walked to his own truck at an even pace, with the dog at his side and the folder against his ribs, and he drove the long way back to the motel watching his mirrors, and the crew cab did not follow, which told him more than following would have. It told him they already knew where he was staying. He read the folder that night, under the motel lamp with the dog watching from the second bed. The boy had been better than careful. He had been thorough in a way that broke Cole's heart, because it was the kind of thorough Cole had taught younger men and never thought a quiet kid from his old unit would have carried home. Daniel had copied every lease on that road, dated, signed, decades old. The kind of long tenancy agreements that under the state's own statutes could not simply be voided by a tax lien transfer. He had copied the county records showing Meadowline buying the liens for pennies. He had a list of names, the old renters, and beside each name a date when they had, quote, relocated, and the dates marched down the page in a tightening line, faster and faster as the deadline for the co-op deal came on. And at the back, in the boy's plain, blunt handwriting, a single page of notes, and the last line of it stopped Cole's breath. They came to the house again, tonight. It said the man in the gray truck. He says next time, he will not knock. The man in the gray truck, the crew cab. Cole sat with that for a long while. Then he did the thing that 11 years ago he would not have done, the thing his grief had taught him to skip, the thing that turned out to be the whole lesson. He did not go after the man in the gray truck. He picked up the folder, and he started thinking about who needed to see it. In the morning, he went to find the law. Harlan's Bend had a sheriff's substation, one deputy assigned to 3 townships, a young woman named Renata Soto who had grown up 2 counties over and taken the post because nobody else wanted it. She was 36, dark-haired, careful, with the flat, steady gaze of a person who had learned that the truth was usually less convenient than the lie, and had decided to want it anyway. She listened to Cole for 20 minutes without writing anything down, which he respected, and at the end of it she asked him one question. Why do you care? He is not your family. You did not even know he was alive. Cole looked at the dog lying across her office floor. He served with me, he said. I carried him out of a street, I do not say the name of, and I thought he died in my arms, and he did not. And he came here and tried to do the right thing for a road full of old people, and somebody made sure he died alone for it. He was 19 the last time I really saw him. I owe him the 11 years I spent grieving the wrong thing. Renata was quiet. Then she said she had tried to open Daniel Reyes a year ago and been told there was nothing to open. She said the natural causes finding had come from a contract medical examiner the county used, and the county was small, and the co-op deal had a great many local signatures on it, and a deputy with 3 townships and no budget did not pick fights she could not win. A folder, though, she said, a folder changes the arithmetic. She would need it. Entered properly, she would need the leases authenticated. She would need the medical file reopened by someone outside the county, and she knew. She said exactly the kind of pressure that would come down the moment she filed the first piece of paper. She was right about the pressure. It came fast and it came smooth. A man arrived at the motel 2 days later, not in a gray truck, in a clean, dark sedan, in a suit that had no business on the county road. He was perhaps 50 silver at the temples, a smile fitted to his face like a thing he put on each morning, and he introduced himself as a regional director for Meadowline Property Partners and asked if he might buy Cole a cup of coffee. His name was Garrett Voss. Duke stood up when Voss came near the door and did not growl and did not bark. He simply stood and put himself between the man and Cole and stared, and Voss looked down at the dog and his smile did not change, but something behind it did, and Cole knew then that he was looking at the man who knew exactly what had happened in the Setterfield house, because a man with nothing to hide does not flinch at a dog. Voss talked for 10 minutes in the language of men who steal with paperwork. He spoke of misunderstandings, of how grief could lead a man to see patterns that were not there, of how the company had only ever wanted to help an aging community transition gracefully, of how attachments to old documents could expose a person to liability he had not considered. He used the word liability the way the gray truck man had used the word relocated. And then, gently, almost kindly, he mentioned that he understood Cole traveled with a fine animal, and that the county had leash ordinances that were enforced unevenly, and that it would be a shame for a good dog to end up impounded over a technicality while its owner was tied up in some legal trouble of his own making. It was the only threat the man made, and he made it about the dog, and that was his mistake. Because Cole had spent 11 years with nothing to protect and had forgotten what it did to him to have something again. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand up. He looked at Garrett Voss across the little motel table, and he said, quietly, that he had served with men who threatened better than that, and that the folder was already out of his hands, which was not yet true. Voss should drive his clean car back to wherever clean cars came from and wait, like everyone else, to see what the truth decided to do. Voss left smiling. The smile was the last charming thing about him that anyone in Harlan's Bend would ever see. Cole made the folder true to his word. He drove it to a copy shop in the county seat and made 3 copies. One went to Renata, entered into evidence with a date and a signature. One went to a legal aid office 2 hours away that handled exactly these tenant cases and had been looking for a road like this one for years. And one he kept in the truck with the dog. He had learned the lesson 11 years too late, and he was not going to unlearn it now. You do not carry the weight alone. You hand it to the people whose work it is, and you stand with them while they do it, and you do not mistake standing alone for strength. It had never been strength. It had only been a way of not being hurt again. And the boy in the ground had paid for Cole's habit of it, and Cole was done. The thing the company had not counted on was the old people. Verna had said it on the first day, and Cole had not understood it yet. That animal did not circle that stone for nothing. The folder gave Renata the leverage to reopen the file. But a reopened file is a slow thing, and slow things die quietly in small counties unless somebody keeps the lights on them. So Cole did the other thing he had spent his life avoiding. He knocked on doors. He went back to Asa Whitlock first, and Asa put on his coat and came with him. Shotgun left at home, and the 2 of them went up and down that road and the next one, and they found the relocated old people where they had landed in their daughter's spare rooms and in the county home, and Cole sat with each of them and listened, and the dog lay at each of their feet, and one by one they began to talk. They had signed under pressure. They had been told they had no choice. They had been shown letters with the county seal on them that turned out to mean nothing, and they had been frightened, and they had been alone, and the company had counted on them staying alone and ashamed. They stopped being alone. By the second week there were 14 of them, and they met at the church with the camper out back, a low clapboard building with a furnace that groaned and a coffee urn that Verna ran like a quartermaster. And they came in their good coats and sat in the folding chairs in a half circle, and at first they would not look at each other, because shame is a private thing, and they had each carried theirs alone. Then one of them spoke. A woman named Etta Malden, 79, who had signed her house away in an afternoon because a man in a clean jacket told her the sheriff would come if she did not, and who had not told her own daughter the real reason she left it. She said it out loud in that cold room, the whole of it, her hands folded hard in her lap, and when she finished she looked up and found 13 faces that knew exactly what she meant, and something in the room shifted that no clean car could ever shift back. Verna brought coffee and a 30-cup urn, and the legal aid lawyer drove out to take statements. And what had been one dead man's folder became 14 living voices, and a thing like that, once it starts, is very hard for a clean car to make quiet. Renata got the medical file reopened. An examiner from out of the region looked at what the county examiner had signed, and would not sign the same. The finding changed from natural causes to undetermined pending, which does not sound like much, but lands like a door swinging open, because undetermined means the question is alive again, and a live question with 14 sworn statements behind it is the kind of thing that brings people from the state capitol in cars even cleaner than Garrett Foss's. It did not end in a courtroom with a verdict, the way it does in the stories that lie to you. It ended the way these things actually end, slowly, in offices, in filings, in a company restructuring under a new name, and quietly forfeiting its claims to 11 houses on a county road, rather than answer 14 tenants and a reopened death and a deputy who would not let go. Garrett Voss was not arrested. Men like Garrett Voss are seldom arrested. He was reassigned, the company said, and the gray truck man was gone before anyone thought to ask his name, and that was the part that sat hardest with Cole, that the worst of it walked away. He said as much to Renata near the end, standing in her cold little office. She did not give him the easy answer. She said that justice in a place this size was not a hammer, it was a tide. And a tide does not punch a man. It just takes the ground out from under him, a grain at a time, until one morning he finds he is standing on nothing. The houses are saved, she said. The old people are home. The boy's name is on a file that does not lie anymore. That is what we get. It is not everything. It is not nothing. Asa Whitlock got his house. The 60-day letter became scrap. He had Cole and Duke out for supper the night the legal aid lawyer called to say the claim was forfeited, and the old man cooked the way old men who have lived alone a long time cook, too much of one thing and none of another, a pot of beans and a skillet of cornbread and a jar of pepper relish he had put up himself in some better year. He set 3 plates and a bowl on the floor, and he filled the bowl from the same pot. And he said grace, short and plain, thanking God for stubborn dogs and slow tides, and his voice caught once on the word home, and he covered it with a cough and went on. Cole found that he could not speak for a moment, and Asa let him not speak, which is the kindest thing one private man can do for another. They ate without much talk. The dog cleaned the bowl and lay down by the stove, and Asa looked at him for a long while and said that the boy's dog used to lie in just that spot, just so, and that he had wondered for 3 winters where that dog had got to, and that maybe, he said maybe some debts get paid by the next one through the door. The grave was still the thing, though. The dog had circled the grave, and Cole had read the name, and everything after had come from that, and Cole knew the story was not finished while Daniel Reyes still lay under a county stone that said only his name and 2 dates and nothing of who he had been. He paid for a new stone. He did not have much, but he had enough for that, and he drove 2 counties over to the monument yard and stood in the cold among the blank granite, running his glove over the rough and the polished until he found one the color of the hillside in winter. When the man asked him what he wanted, carved, Cole had it ready because he had been writing it in his head for weeks. The name, the dates, the true ones, and below that 4 words. The man read it back to be sure, pencil hovering over his order pad, and asked if Cole wanted anything more. Scripture, a rank, a flourish, and Cole said, no. Daniel would have wanted it plain. Daniel had always wanted things plain. They set the new stone on a clear, cold morning at the end of that long winter. The first morning the snow had let up enough to see the whole valley from the hillside. Verna was there, and Asa in his good coat, and Renata in plain clothes off the clock, and the legal aid lawyer who had driven 2 hours and 4 of the old tenants who could still make the climb, and they stood in a loose ring around the stone while the county man set it and tamped the earth. Nobody made a speech. It was not that kind of gathering. Cole had learned that the deepest things were said by showing up, by the labor of the climb, by the bodies standing in the cold, because a man none of them had known well enough had been worth the trouble. The boy had spent his last good years trying to keep a road full of strangers in their homes, and the road full of strangers had come up the hill to keep him company at last. Duke did not circle the stone this time. That was the thing Cole noticed, standing there, and it went through him like the first warmth after a long cold. The dog walked up to the new granite and sniffed it once, and then lay down beside it, in the thin sun with his head on his paws and his eyes half closed, easy the way a dog lies down when the watch is over and the relief has come. He had circled the old stone because something was wrong and unfinished and unspoken, and now it was none of those things, and the dog knew it before Cole did, the way the dog always knew things first. Cole crouched and put his hand on the warm fur of the dog's neck and felt the slow, steady breathing under his palm. And he understood that he had come to this town to stand over one grave and had ended up tending another, and that somewhere in the trade he had stopped being a man who left. He did not leave. That was the quiet end of it, the part no letter from the county would ever record. The Setterfield place was one of the houses saved, and it stood empty, and Cole had a folder's worth of reasons to know the boy had loved it, so he asked the legal aid lawyer how a man went about renting a house that a company had just been forced to let go of, and the answer turned out to be simpler than he expected. By the next winter he had the papers off the windows and the porch shored up and a fire in the stove, and the dog had a yard. Dasa Whitlock came for supper on Sundays and complained about Cole's coffee, and Verna brought cuttings from her garden in the spring and showed Cole where the sun fell longest. He took the odd work the boy used to take. He carried Verna's salt bags in the winter. He fixed what was broken on that road, latch by latch, because it turned out that was a way of being close to a friend he had grieved too early and known too late, and because a man has to put his hands on something, and these were good things to put them on. He visited the hill often. The dog led the way every time up the gravel path across the rows and lay down by the stone in the sun or the snow, and waited while Cole stood there with his hat in his hands and said the few plain things a man says to a friend he is no longer in a hurry to stop missing. The grief had changed its shape. It was not the cold, dead thing he had carried for 11 years, the grief for a man who had never actually died. It was a living grief now, warm at the edges, the kind you carry, the way you carry, a name you are proud to have known. And it had a town wrapped around it, and a dog lying in the sun beside it, and a stone that told the truth. Here is what the story leaves you with. If you have stayed all the way to the cold, bright end of it, you may spend years grieving the wrong thing. You may build a whole life around a loss you got wrong, around a door you slammed so it could never hurt you again. And you may believe that carrying it alone is the same as being strong. It is not. The boy on that hillside knew it. He stood his post for a road full of strangers, because he understood that nobody is saved alone, nobody is mourned alone, and nobody should die alone. And it cost him, and it should not have. And the only thing the living can do about a debt like that is refuse to keep paying it in the same coin, hand the weight to others, climb the hill in the cold for someone, read the name on the stone, even when you are afraid of what it will cost you, because the cost is almost always the beginning of being whole again. The dog knew which grave was owed. He circled it, until a man he trusted finally came and read the name. And when the debt was paid, in tenant statements and a reopened file, and a road full of saved houses and a stone that does not lie, the dog lay down in the sun and rested, because the watch was finally over, and the man he had brought there was, after all the years and all the leaving, May the truth find you the way it found him, slow and cold and worth every step. May you have someone who will not leave the grave until you come. May you be brave enough to read the name. And may God keep you, and keep the ones you have grieved too soon, and bring you in the end all the way home.